Colleagues, I think we'll start. We're a small but select group for a Monday evening. This is fantastic, and it's really an opportunity for our speaker, who I'll introduce in a second. An opportunity. He was coming into Canberra, and we thought, well, we can't possibly let him come to Canberra and not speak, because he has such interesting things to share with us. I'm Sharon Friel, the director of RegNet, and we were just talking about that real interdisciplinary work that happens in RegNet, and of course among many colleagues in the room. And that has such rewards but such challenges sometimes as well. For us within social sciences, when you start to come at it from various angles. So I think it'll be it's really very timely for what Peter is going to speak about. So let me just tell you a little bit about him. You've seen it from the flyer. But Peter's got this lovely position, a Professor of Sociology, Health and Wellbeing. You wouldn't believe how hard it is to get a position like that, bringing sociology and health together in the actual title of the position. So it's great. Over at the University of Auckland. I've known his work for many years through the Journal of Social Science and Medicine, which again was really cutting edge of trying to bring social sciences and health together. At the time, we just didn't have anything like that. And he's the really tough senior editor in health policy. I'm pretty sure you've rejected so many of my papers. And he's got this interesting, you'll see from his short bio, it's the appointments in the Department of Statistics and in the School of Population Health. So again, you'll hear a quantitative bent, I think, coming through in your work, and also heads up, we were just talking about that, the ongoing challenge for us of constantly trying to get research funding to keep centres, programmes of work going, but he heads up the Centre of Methods and Policy Application in the Social Sciences, the Research Centre there at the university. So a very applied application. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Peter. How long do you want to speak for? About 40 minutes, and then we'll have time for some discussion. And then we've got some just drinks and nibbles just over in the foyer of the RegNet, the Coombs Extension building. We'll move into that there, because that's our lovely new entrance, so we want you to come and share that with us. So no further ado, Peter.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for turning out, folks. I've been coming to ANU for a good number of years. In the early days, it was Frank Jones, and then NSEF, and then more recently the demography unit when I was on a committee at NHMRC. But I couldn't find my way here, so I got a taxi. The place changes so much. But today I'm just going to talk about a little bit of an obsession, which I'm coming to the stage of my career where I think I can ride the odd hobby horse. And I've sort of got a bit worried, frankly, and this has got a New Zealand provenance, but I think it has a wider resonance. So I'm going to talk a little bit, I'm going to talk a little bit about, are these hard times? Things are tough in New Zealand. We've had a lot of cutbacks. We've been told the STEM subjects are the important ones. So the social science are a little bit on the defensive. Secondly, making knowledge claims. I think where social science really comes into its own is that we actually make defensible knowledge claims about the complexity of the social world or the social science world. And that's what marks us off from just common sense observations. We really have to hang our hat on that. Thirdly, I'm going to talk about improving our methods. I'm basically, I guess, a methodologist as well as a policy person. And I put together some volumes recently on trying to draw inferences in non-experimental settings, which is just essentially the environment where most of us are working. And secondly, arguing that we ought to hang on to quantitative methods in the social sciences, where back home there's been, frankly, a flight from them. So that I was just looking over the PhDs of the last 15 years in sociology and politics, and out of 30, only 3 had any quantitative element at all. Then I'm going to talk about impact. I know there's an impact agenda, which is worrisome to some people, but what I'm arguing about is we ought to be selling our wares, and that actually we've got a good story to tell. And there's a book on the impact agenda where they make the argument that actually social scientists, they may not hit the natures and the like, but they do get published, but also they're out there in the world where government and NGOs and other organisations take an interest in their work. And finally, some concluding thought. Basically, I'm a believer in public social science. By the way, I should acknowledge also my friends John and Valerie Braithwaite here. I knew John when he started as Chief Executive of the Consumers Association. Then he moved into the sociology of law, and ever since I've followed his work with interest, and Valerie similarly. I was on a panel recently with her at the Institute of Social Science Research. Okay, in our world, we're getting statements that the STEM subjects are to be preferred. Research funding is ferocious in the Blue Skies area. Health Research Council is getting more of a clinical emphasis. And there are some very complex selection processes which are really hard to discern. And in the public sector, things are very tight. We've relied on a few contracts and things there, and we've had people come to our equivalent to the Axbury Summer School, but that's dropped quite a bit because they just don't have the spare resource. So things are tight. We've also had a thing called the National Science Challenges. I don't know if you've had them as well, but these were big picture things, getting the public involved, 10 of them. But they're all very natural science, biological, land and water, Antarctica, technological innovation. There's 3 with a vaguely social science element, and they're all framed with a health angle. The only way you can talk about inequality or any of those kind of things is sort of smuggle them in sort of a health frame, which sort of makes it more acceptable. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation could be that we just don't rate, and that people think, when they think of the world, they think of it in health terms. I should also say it's not peculiar to us. The National Science Foundation has produced a book called Bringing People into Focus, How Social, Behavioural and Economic Research Addresses National Challenges. They have been under pressure there. People have tried to pass legislation in Congress to actually almost eliminate any political science funding. And in other respects, economic research, it's got to be sort of oriented towards the economy of the US. And of course, in the UK, you had the Social Science Research Council that changed its name to the Economic and Social Research Council just to sort of keep governments on side. But when you look at an outfit like the World Economic Forum, which is basically a talk fest for CEOs and people in sort of top bureaucratic positions, they asked their CEOs what the top 10 global risks were. And really, all of them have a major social science element. So that when you look at actually what's really troubling the world, sure they look as though they're technical service like water, but it's actually scarcity of water. It's the conflicts over water, political and social instability, food crisis. Okay, you've got to grow food, but a lot of that's about the way in which basic agricultural systems have been undermined. So a lot of it comes down to fundamental social science insights, and somehow this isn't feeding into the sort of priority setting in the research agenda. Now, in New Zealand, the thing that interested me was we've got a chief science advisor, which we have too, called Peter Gluckman, and he said social science is not well constituted within the New Zealand social science system, so he was drawing a notice to this, but. Back in 1970, I remember, this is when I started at Canterbury University in February 1970, and this guy, Gibson, wrote a report that said that the council should develop a social science arm. So we've had 40 years where, frankly, nothing much has improved. So I'm not drawing any conspiracy theories. I'm just saying there's an issue here, and it's not entirely of our own making. It's partly the external events, but also I think we should also look at ourselves and see whether we can do something about that. And that's, I guess, where I'm starting from a rather applied policy point of view. Okay, so one of my arguments is what we really can be sure about is we make knowledge claims, and I drew this up in order to convince Stage 1 sociology students that actually had to learn research methods. I start off by showing 2 of my colleagues from political science at Auckland. One has done a book on the ethics and acquisition of organs, and the other one's done transitional justice and established democracies. Both of those rely on key facts which they bring to bear about organ donation, about how efficacious it is at making a difference to large-scale, public health problems. And similarly with the other one, the judicial one, he requires basic information about transitional justice. Does it apply in different cultural settings? So these are colleagues in political science I was trying to, because they don't have a research methods course. You can go all the way through politics at Auckland without learning research methods. So, I was kind of trying to convince them that actually if you want to make claims, you needed to actually have some sort of foundation to them. So I argue that one of the things about what we do is that we try to get it below patterns, which are not obvious to the sort of casual observer. Many common sense observations can lead people astray, particularly in politics, in public life. Thirdly, there are a lot of common mistakes made in public debate. And finally, governments are actually looking for evidence. So I think we should sort of look at what we can do in these areas to sort of shore up our claims as being high. And I'll give you examples of each one of these. This is work that I did on social class when I first got started in health policy area in New Zealand, and we looked at the social class gradients. That's these are the professional and employing classes, and these are the labourers, and you can see these are the death rates. That's one, that's the average, and that's above and that's below. So you see these clear gradients, and it really hasn't. The death rates have declined, but the gradients haven't shifted all that much. But you couldn't really tell that from everyday observation. All my colleagues in epidemiology have now discovered social class and all sorts of other social concepts, which is great. But we can draw little things and show that they haven't shifted much, but that you couldn't tell from everyday observation. You need really solid methods and collection of information. In fact, that was a work I originally did with Frank Jones way back in the late 70s, early 80s, developing social class measures and applying. We were looking at social mobility in Australia and New Zealand and produced a book. Secondly, common sense can lead you astray. This is a report by Peter Gluckman, which I mentioned earlier on, towards better use of evidence in policy formation, a discussion paper. And he draws attention to the issue about driver education. Everyone believed that the sooner you had driver education in schools, the better. The parents believed it, the teachers believed it, the politicians believed it, the advocates believed it, the kids believed it. But they were actually wrong. So when you look closely at it, you find that if anything, sometimes it can make matters worse. It certainly doesn't seem to make it better. And it's partly got something to do with the maturity of kids. They've got to get a bit more mature, be able to think in a more kind of holistic way before they can take on some of the skill sets required to make judgment calls when you're driving a car. And if you start that too early, that can be a bad thing. So this was an instance where a review of the research evidence could kind of show that common sense actually did not apply. It seems common sense. The sooner you start people to learn how to drive a car, that must be better. Common mistakes in public debate. We had a recent series in the New Zealand Herald about inequality. Actually, it was a good series. It was led by this guy, Simon Collins. And they were looking at how long the gaps would take to narrow between different ethnic groups. And they said imprisonment rates would take a millennium. And when I saw that, I thought to myself, that cannot be right. I mean, there are obviously huge differences, which are troubling, but I don't believe they can be that right. So I phoned up Simon and I said, by the way, did you control for age? And he said, no. He said, we couldn't afford it. Because it involved getting all sorts of rates according to age. So if you look at the age structure of New Zealand, you've got the average, the sort of median age for the Pākehā European population, 41, and the median age of the Maori is 23.9. So you've got basically, it's the young people who are getting into trouble. This is not to say there's not a big difference, and there's quite possibly a troubling difference, but a good part of it's to do with the group that's particularly at risk, and it isn't ageing Pākehā. It's youthful Pākehā and youthful Maori. And probably Maori more than Pākehā because of socioeconomic and other cultural and other factors. So, common mistakes can be made in public debate. And this is one thing I really learned when I was at the med school in epidemiology, and I had to be so damn careful about how you presented your figures, which could be very misleading if you didn't control for them and adjust them and present them in the right way. Finally, governments want evidence. This is some UK stuff. What works, HM government? The Alliance for Useful Evidence. Gosh, I'd love to belong to an alliance like that. But so obviously but there is a market, quotes, a market out there where, frankly, governments are struggling and need people to sort of advise them. They won't necessarily take that advice. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying it's easy. But what I'm saying is at least we should give it a try. So that's my argument. One of my arguments is that social sciences as a whole paradigm has a lot to help us as advanced societies trying to sort of order our lives and make sense of the world around us and advance forwards. And the truth is, I think we are indeed the sciences of the 21st century, where a lot of the technical and other problems have been solved or will continue to be solved. We'll know about matter underneath the Alps in Switzerland, but we'll still be struggling with disputes in the Middle East and Southeast Asia and elsewhere. So we've got, those are the areas we need to be looking at. So one argument I have is we need to improve our methods. And I'll give an example in New Zealand context about these guys did the study on how important, trying to measure the income gains from migration. And one of the problems there is you've got big selection effects because the people who migrate are different from those who don't. So if you compare the two, you get a very bad, over optimistic estimate because they're really, goers. So what they did is they used the ballot scheme we had in New Zealand, where migrants came to New Zealand on like in one of the islands. You had people put their names into a lottery, and then half of them would be allowed to go to New Zealand. And so they used that as a sort of a lottery system to randomise the differences between those who migrated and those who didn't. And the difference in the estimates was 4 or 5-fold between a sort of a rather unintelligent approach to comparing say manufacturing wages in Tonga and New Zealand versus this one. This is a quarter. The income gains were still there, but they were a quarter of what you might have thought they were. So one approach is actually they're trying randomised controlled trials in public policy, and I think we should do more of that. And we haven't thought about that as much as we should have. But the truth is, in many areas, we cannot do that. And there are some areas, for example, I was interested in a recent development studies area where the Mexican government started their sort of family support system, and they didn't have enough money to cover everybody. So they randomly selected a subset of villages, and then when they got more money, they selected the rest. So they were able to compare between them as to whether those villages that got it first showed any advantage over those that didn't, got it next. So, it was an intelligent use of what was otherwise a bureaucratic necessity, namely they didn't have enough money. So, we could think about those. I put together this volume called Data Inference and Observational Settings. It's a collection of readings, and really I did it because I looked at a colleague's reading list when I was in New York at New York University. He said, oh, look, here's my reading list for slouching towards causal analysis. And I looked at it and I thought, ye gods, I don't know about this stuff. And I thought, even though I think I'm quite a good methodologist, I'd actually missed out on a whole area of development that's occurred. And what this set of volumes does is actually look at how that's developed in criminology, it's developed in statistics, it's developed in econometrics, it's developed in social policy. It's quite interesting, all quite independently, using different terms, but actually doing the same thing. So I just put that up, and I'll give you a couple of examples. Here's an example from Social Science and Medicine, Avadana, and it's about the argument of Pickett and Wilkinson about whether differences between societies which are different in inequality, whether that actually causes social pathologies, and it looks very convincing. What these guys did was, first of all, there's obviously strong income inequality related to infant mortality, strong ecological associations, which means that you compare things across, and it's striking. The most unequal societies also have the highest infant inequality rates. In mortality rates. But what they argued was that it should be done over time. And so what they did was they looked at 34 OECD countries over 48 years, and they looked at the Gini coefficient and infant mortality. So in the New Zealand case, what they found was a perfect -1. So in other words, inequality has been increasing in New Zealand year by year. But at the same time, infant mortality has been improving year by year. So there was a perfect -1. But that doesn't necessarily undermine the Pickett and Wilkinson thesis. It's basically so something's going on in New Zealand that's protecting infant mortality, some policy interventions from what is otherwise a society that's getting more unequal. And so what they found, the Gini changes were not associated with infant mortality when you use this fixed effects approach by looking at things over time. And that what they argue is that was possibly due to social policies that reducing IMR cluster and relatively egalitarian effects countries where they're using policy which can shield families from the impacts of inequality. So it doesn't necessarily undermine the overall hypothesis, but actually puts it, frankly, on a firm foundation, in my view. And they came and spoke at Auckland, and I asked them this question, and the truth was they were a bit flummoxed because they knew about the paper, and I'm not sure they've been quite know how to sort of deal with that. Another paper from the American Sociological Review, the effects of prenatal poverty on infant health. How do you look at that? In particular, looking at earned income credits. Like in New Zealand, probably like you, we've introduced income credits in work in order to encourage people with families to stay in work and to help them maintain their families. But how do you do an experiment? And what you can do in the US, of course, you've got 50 different states. And they've all introduced these things at different times, according to different political moments. And so the hypothesis is that work and income schemes will raise incomes and employment for unmarried mothers and in turn improve infant health. Well, actually, that's a bonus. Frankly, if that happens, I'm very happy. I'm very happy if unmarried mothers actually get work and their incomes improve marvellously. But if on top of that, actually, it affects infant health, I'm amazed, frankly, which is great. It's a bonus. So what they did was they used a natural experiment design where they compared between US states in the introduction of income work incentives to estimate the effects of prenatal poverty on health. And what they found was that schemes increased employment by 19%, incomes by a third, and increased infant birth weight and slightly reduced smoking. So what they found was after, across these states, those women who went into work and then had a baby compared with in those states where women hadn't done that the babies had were less likely to be had low birth weight. So those are two studies. I picked them in the one instance because the infant mortality ones it's very dear to people, and in this instance because we in New Zealand had quite a debate about whether it's the right thing to get solo parents into work. Because actually there's no evidence that it indeed affects infant health. There's quite a bit of debate about it, and I thought, well, here's something that might help that. Okay, so inference by design, I think we could do a lot more rather than waving our hands to actually improve the design of our studies so that they become more convincing. This could also be the case in qualitative research, but it's most likely to be the case in more quantitatively inclined research, which is what I'm talking about today. So the second part, and again I might be talking to the converted or talking to people here. When I gave this talk in Wellington, there was a guy in there from the States who heads up Motu Research Unit, just come over from Brandeis, and he said, "Hey Peter, you're preaching to the choir." And I said, "Oh, we say we preach to the converted." He said, "So do we too." So I don't know whether I'm preaching to the choir here, but my worry is as I come to the end of my career that frankly a lot of things I've worked for, which is kind of rigorous methodology, methods being compulsory at the undergraduate level, quantitative elements to it along with other things are pretty much disappearing, except when you get the odd enthusiast. And that's partly because there isn't, for some reason, it's not seen as important, and also you're getting faculty, staff who actually can't teach these things and they feel uncomfortable being requested to do so. So it's a problem. But it's a problem at the British, this isn't a problem in the States. I say, problem in the States is the other direction, too much quantification, probably. But the British Academy argue that quantitative skills in social science and humanities are greatly deficient, and this is a problem. I've always thought the British Academy basically being about humanities, but they were sufficiently concerned to put out a research paper in this area. And the Nuffield Foundation put together £15 million with a group of stakeholders, £20 million, which they put towards investment in undergraduate quantitative teaching in the UK. And I know about this because I was one of the reviewers of the applications in this area. So at some point, this has taken decades to get this to this stage, but at some point, obviously, the sort of British sort of research elite in the social sciences, which is not representative, frankly, of the great mass of academics in the social sciences, thought that this was a sort of a state strategic issue and have really pushed it along. It's not applicable to all disciplines of applied economics, psychology. It's more in the sort of softer ones, you might say, sociology, political science, maybe management, and a few others, human geography. So I did my own thing. I as you can see, I'm a preacher by inclination. So I gave a talk, 4 years ago at Victoria University, Wellington, rectifying the quantitative deficit in the social science, a modest proposal. And they all said, "Oh, you've been reading that author. Who is that author? Was it Swift? Was it? He had this thing called A Modest Proposal." But anyway, just some clarifications of my modest proposal. What I'm not saying is that all social science disciplines are equally afflicted. Psychology, economics seem to be okay. I'm not saying there's nobody with quantitative skills. There are some, but some departments are completely bereft in New Zealand. And I'm not saying quantitative skills must displace ones. I think students should be ambidextrous, basically. I mean, I did a history degree. That was my first degree. I then decided, I thought, wow, cool, scratch. I want to affect the real world. I want to influence policy people. I better learn a bit of maths. And that's why I did it. So I wasn't that. And nor do I think students should be taught by statisticians, except on the margin. I'm afraid I have colleagues who are statisticians, and I've got an appointment in the statistics department, and I don't think they'd like me to say this, but that would really put off a number of social science students. A lot of them have basically numerophobia unless it's taught with strong substantive elements. So that when my tutor says, when I taught these courses in stats, we taught them to learn the technique. When I'm involved in these labs with the social science students, they want the technique in order to answer a research question. That's the difference. So they want to see, I want to ask a research question, an intriguing research question. How do I do that? This guy's going to help me. So it's that way round. So you need the sort of substantive reason for doing it. What I am saying is we're nearing the point where graduates lack crucial skills. Actually, we're well past it in New Zealand, well past it. But that's sort of sugaring the pill. Our disciplines are danger of becoming one-dimensional in this area. As I said, 3 out of 30 PhDs over the last 15 years had any quantitative element at all. One was mixed methods, and they were all non-New Zealand students. That's the amazing thing. And the other thing is sort of try to bring in a final punch and say if we don't come up with these goods, people actually will not call us around the table. And so key sociological concepts will not be brought to bear. That's my sort of final attempt to convince my colleagues. Okay, we try to do, at Compass, we run the New Zealand Social Statistics Network, and we run research methods course, and we're doing that to 2005, and it's modelled on the Axbury courses here. In fact, we bring over their teachers. And because we've just tried to do, we don't make any money. In fact, we lose money. We don't get any government support at all. We should. But that's our little way of trying. We do it in Wellington, which is our capital city, because really we need the public servants there, otherwise we can't run it. We tried it at Auckland. Not enough academics were interested. Not enough students. We had to charge them too much. So I guess that's one of my arguments about the social sciences is that it's their external factors, but also their internal ones. And I think one of them is that we've just got to be quite serious about how convincing our results are to make knowledge claims and how methodologically sound. Although I've emphasised quantification, that's because I think that's a particular deficit, but I still feel sound research design, even with qualitative methods, can make a difference, like simple comparative techniques. Many of these PhDs I've seen, which are qualitative, are a single case study, following something through without a comparative point of view. Now, even that would make a difference, saying one area, this worked well, they didn't work well, and do a case study on two things. So even fundamental research design things of that kind. So I think one of our strong suits is also impact. I guess you would have seen this book, Assessing Impact. And I know some people feel uncomfortable about this. I think we're being turned into sort of hamsters on treadmills, turning out stuff that's got impact and forgetting the bigger picture, not doing any important work. So I'd like to set that aside. I think we still should do blue skies work. I think we should not just work to the sort of very nose to the grindstone applied stuff. But at the same time, what we do, we should be telling people about. So these guys in the UK, social science students are almost in equal par with a number of STEM students. So it's not a lack of numbers that we're doing a big job in the tertiary sector. They look at the funding in the UK, this is, and 80% goes to STEM. Social sciences only get 14, but, which is sort of aggravating. But the truth is they do have more expensive equipment. They have big laboratories and centrifuges and things like that. And they have to invest underneath the Swiss mountains in order to do these clever things to find the source of matter. So anyway, we are disadvantaged in that respect. But when you look at citations in external society mentions, that is outside civil society, international and private sector, you find that these are the STEM subjects. They're at the bottom. all the ones that are highly cited are social science ones: anthropology, psychology, geography, social policy, history. So we actually we are making a difference. It's just that it's not counted. It's not in scientific journals, but we still need to make more of it. These guys did an interesting study where they looked at the academic influences. They used conventional things of a sort of metric kind, which I know have a bad flavour, but I think metrics, if used properly, are worth having. And then that was their academic kudos, and then they also looked at external, the sort of total number of Google references, proportion of references in the external domain. So they used this to try to get a sense of they had a sample of academics, and they sort of drew up a thing like this where they had two axes. One was academic outputs, which is a traditional thing, and the other one's is external visibility. They didn't use the word impacts, just external visibility. And they found that there are some people who are completely invisible on both. None of us want to be there. And then you've got the publishers, and then you've got the applied researchers. So that's sort of a big chunk of our colleagues. Then you've got the solid middle who do a bit of both. And then you've got the sort of influentials who are, the books you read and have on your shelf, and then the communicators who might be the public intellectuals, I don't know. So, this is their way of looking at trying to make more of what social science does by accepting not only does an academic thing, but also does work into the public arena. They looked at a combined ranking of results for government, UK and domestic, and they found that the top ones, apart from medicine, were social policy, economics, geography, sociology, and business and management. And here are the other STEM subjects down here. So, there is a story to be told there, even though we're not getting the money, even though governments don't seem to know what to do with us. The truth is that if we play our cards right, there is a bit of a reasonable story to be told there. I know the impact agenda is sort of potentially kind of a sort of part of the surveillance state, where we've all got to account for every bit of work we're doing and tot it up, and we've got to that stage too with our PBRF, or you've got the REA or whatever, and so it's something similar. But I still say to my colleagues, I ran the seminar series in the sociology department in the first semester. And I thought, well, hang on, I've got here are people who really worked hard to put together a presentation, and 15, 20 people turn up. Good, we had good up. But 15, 20 people, they're probably, and that's all we'll ever know about that particular presentation. So, and yet, if we'd gone onto social media, onto Twitter, onto whatever, we could have got out to other audiences, people who couldn't get there. Never heard of it, didn't even know it was on, maybe even in other countries. And so I just think the traditional seminar, which we've got one today, which is great, thank you very much, we could actually make more of them because they're all knowledge claims of various kinds, and they could be of interest, and and it's quite amazing with the internet these days. In the old days, this is all that was possible, but actually nowadays, it's kind of a great free-for-all out there, and you could actually do a lot more. And so these guys give an example of how they tweet, impact of tweeting on downloads. So they tweeted 3 times and they got 700 downloads, and it went down, then it up. So over a period of 2 years. So there are ways, and this is not you could regard what's shameless prostituting yourself out there. But the truth is, and some people are a bit like that. But actually, the truth is, if you're doing good work, you want people to know about it. And why not? So that's my view. And actually, the university likes it because it raises their profile. They're able to say to governments, we're well cited. It improves their rankings internationally because so much goes on citations. Okay, so just some concluding thoughts where essentially I bring together a few what I sort of stumbled across and have done myself. Where I think, and again, I'm probably preaching to the converted. When I walk around here, I think, God, this is what a university really should be like. You're well resourced. You may not think so. It's a nice campus. This is probably why the ANU, in many respects, was established to be an institute of advanced study, with Australia projecting itself as a middle power, and that was before it got to that stage, and I think that's great. I mean, at Auckland, we're on a treadmill with limited resources and all that, and we take it completely for granted, But I think you're probably doing some of these things, or I might be talking to people who are already. I went to the LSE, that's where I did my master's in sociology. And then I went back and did a master's in statistics. I thought to myself, I've got to be quantitatively literate, if that's not a contradiction in terms, numeric. And without knowing it, I never took any notice. It was in Latin after all. That's the English translation. There it is, rerum cognoscere causas, to know the causes of things. And so I reckon that's one of the things, without getting too positivistic. We actually are out there trying to find why things happen. The beaver is the toilet. That's not used. This is the modern logo, the LSE. They kind of have got, they don't sort of pay all that much attention to the beaver. But that was the Webbs. And the Webbs established, they had £20,000 or something like that to set up the LSE in the late 19th, early 20th century. And what vision? Because they thought, in the sort of studied where of the late 19th century socialists, they were there to improve society, and the social sciences were the instrument to do that. And they needed when they looked at Oxbridge and Cambridge, they said, forget it. Those places are old hat. We've got to set up something new that's close to where they'd found poverty and all that in London. That was where the real world was. So they established LSE from scratch with George Bernard Shaw and Wallace and Beatrice and Sidney Webb. So it's amazing. And so without going that direction, I think they had that vision. That's a century ago. So I feel we ought to start delivering on this. So anyway, I think there's a kind of a mission statement of sorts. At our research centre, I try to promote the fact that we're in the public practice of professional social science. It hasn't made any difference to what we do or whether anyone takes notice of it. It makes me feel better, though, and I sleep better at night thinking that's what we're doing. So I think we're creating knowledge, but we're also engaging community. So we're obviously out there. We have an advisory board with people on it. We do our skill building, because I think that's a real problem, is we're losing skills. And a big thing, we share data. We collect data and we share it, and that's what I think is great. When I came here in the 1980s, you had the data archive here, and I sent my PhD over in the form of, I don't know, it was the cards or the magnetic tape or whatever. I don't think anyone ever used it, but at least I felt better about it. I felt I'd done my bit to advance science. But what I really stumbled on here was the ESRC, what they're doing in the UK, and this really brought home to me. They've got impact case studies. A selection of case studies highlighting research impact. They've got impact prize winners. They've got impact videos. So they're saying, without going too far down this impact thing, they're actually saying we're doing a good job. We're making a difference to British society. So I think that's great. They also have a research methods festival. I've been to it at least twice. It's great fun. Now, you don't have to be a methods geek like me. You just go along and enjoy it, and it's great. It's at St Catherine's College, and it happens every couple of years. They have a festival of social science. They have social science for schools. They have doctoral training centres, because they hit upon the thing that you actually have to have. The British approach to preparing people for doctoral study is just not good enough. You're just not exposed to the full range of methods and theoretical range for your area. So they want a bit more of an American type system without going all that way. So they have a thing called 1+3. So they require people to do a preparatory year and then go into the PhD. But that's only for people who are on ESSRC scholarships. I don't know how many other outfits have picked it up. It strikes me as being fundamental. And then you've got the humanities, you've got the British Academy and Nuffield Foundation. So, I guess what I'm suggesting is, this is what I'm trying to persuade my colleagues back in New Zealand, with frankly nil effect to date, that there are people out there who actually have us rather stirred about this and are trying to do something. You've almost got without saying it, got the image, the mission of the Webbs a century ago, thinking surely this is the century of the social science. We should really get serious about this. Let's tell people we're doing a good job. Let's make sure we've got the right methods. Thank you very much.